today we're going to be looking at the life of Gideon, a man who I'm sure is known to many of you. Gideon lived at the time of the Judges, where there was no recognised king or queen of Israel. It was a time of Samson, of Deborah, and at this time there was very much a reoccurring chain of events. The people would turn away from God, do evil in his eyes, and become oppressed by a foreign power. The people would then cry out to God, who would ultimately save them. The people would then go back to praising God, and then over time would turn away from him, and the cycle continues. And we pick up the story of Gideon in Judges 6, where there has been a period of 7 years where the Israelites had been under the oppression and power of the Midianites for 7 years. And a prophet came to them, as many had done before, declaring, come back to God, stop doing evil in his eyes. And the angel of the Lord then appeared to Gideon and called him, declaring over him, the Lord is with you. Go, you mighty warrior. And we read in Judges 6 verse 13, Gideon's very honest response. But sir, Gideon replied, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our fathers told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and put us into the hands of Midian. That's frank honesty there from Gideon of how he was feeling, of the emotions that he was feeling. Look, you say, go you mighty warrior, you say the Lord is with me, but when I look around, when I look at the situation that I find myself in, I just declare, and my only question is, where are you, God? Where are you? And in this present climate, and at the start of this year, you may have had similar discussions. You may have made similar declarations in conversations and in prayer time with God. Where are you right now? Where are you in the midst of everything that we are going through? You may have been feeling that emotion of abandonment and desolation even. Declaring to God, I know and I've experienced and heard all that you have done in my life, in others. But right now I ask, where are you? You may have shouted this to God. And we talk about honesty in relationships and how important it is. And equally it is in our most important relationship between us and God. It is, of course, important. And it's always good to remember that even if you are shouting at God and declaring, where are you, as Gideon did, however much you feel that to be true, we know that we're not in the right, that it's not warranted, that it's not merited. It's in no way could we be in the right by saying that God is doing something wrong. But it's needed. It is needed. We see it numerous occasions in Psalms by King David, powerfully shown in Psalm 13, declaring at the start of that psalm, why have you forgotten me? Why have you turned your face away from me? Look upon me, God. But there's always a but. Just as it's important for us to be honest with God and to shout at him if needed, it is even more important how we finish those prayers, how we finish that conversation. There has to be a but. Because in Psalm 13 we read as we get through that psalm, David says, but I will trust you. I will continue to praise you because you have been good to me. David acknowledges that even in the darkest of days, emotionally, spiritually and physically, the one true hope, the one assurance in victory is found in God. And in the account of Gideon, he makes that abundantly clear. Gideon led the army against the Midianites. The Midianites had a force around 135,000 soldiers, and Gideon had 32,000 to begin with. And you would think even then it seems improbable, those numbers, but it's doable. A small force compared to what the Midianites had, but it is doable. It's not outside the realms of possibility. But we read in Judges 7 that God said, "You have too many men. You have too many men. In order that Israel may not boast against me that her own strength has saved her, you need to make a few announcements." So God said to Gideon, "Look, you tell all of your 32,000 men, if you're afraid, just go." And 22,000 left. And then some time later, there were a body of water, and God said, "Anyone who kneels down to drink, he can go as well." So that 10,000 then reduced to 300 soldiers. That was one Israelite soldier to every 450 Midianite soldiers. That was the odds that Gideon had to work with. But God brought victory even in that situation. So there was no element of doubt in anyone that witnessed that, in the whole of the nation, that God had saved them. God had supernaturally intervened, that God had brought victory. And that is a hope, as Gideon had, as David had, as many people in many different ways, in many different forms, have had and continue to have. The hope that in God there is victory. Even in the unlikeliest of circumstances, even in insurmountable odds that transcend human understanding. But this hope that we have in a God who assures and brings victory, it shouldn't just be an internal hope. It shouldn't just be a hope that is an internal fortitude that just gives us good strength to get through the day. It shouldn't just be a kind of a mental hope that gives us a solace in our mind, that gives us peace and tranquility. But it should practically, tangibly, visibly outwork itself through us and into the lives and the situations and the circumstances around us. For this year, you may have felt, and over this last year, and as you look into 2021, you may have subconsciously or consciously accepted that things are the way they are. That relationships you have with friends and families have become strained, have become difficult, and they will continue to be so until the lockdown lifts or until times change significantly. That there isn't going to be an element of deterioration, maybe even brokenness in those relationships. You may have accepted and continue to expect that we shouldn't be expecting any significant numerical growth in church or great leaps of spiritual growth in the body and the congregation of our church. That we should see and expect us to see this reduction in church ministry, the way that we fellowship. That should just be expected for the times that we're in. For our own gifting inside and outside of church, that we should accept and expect, a reduction in the prophetic ministry, in the prayerful fellowship of the church. That we should just accept that, there's going to be a reduction in job prospects, in finances, in schooling and college prospects. Now, if we have a hope in a God that brings victory, I firmly believe that he sees 2021 and this current situation very differently. His expectation for your life, for your situations, for your relationships, for Beacon Church, for the gifting of its congregation, to be one of flourishing, and abundance, even in difficult seasons. That there can be flourishing in 2021. There can be victory. For, where you have seen, or where you expect to see decline and deterioration, God declares and sees increase and restoration. Where you might see brokenness, God can see reconciliation. Where you see defeat, God declares victory. And this isn't just me, giving some good sound bites out of a self-help book to make you all feel better about this year. Because of course it's going to be hard, of course it's going to be difficult. Of course this isn't really the way that we should be living our lives, or the way things should be, or how God, of course, desires things to be. But the biblical truth still stands. Pandemic or not, lockdown or not, it still stands for 2020, and it still stands for 2021. That we have a God that desires human flourishing, human abundance in this life. A God that declares victory over the darkest of circumstances, against improbable odds as Gideon faced. Our God that we serve, that we follow, declares victory in this time. And what God did with Gideon is quite interesting. Before the Israelites attacked, God said to Gideon, look, if you're too afraid to attack right now, go down to the Midianite camp and hear what they're saying, for it to encourage you. And Gideon and his servant did, and the Midianites were having prophetic dreams that were showing glimpses and were signposting to the Israelite victory. And I believe that's something for us to pray into. For where you are at the moment, in perhaps a very difficult time, spiritually, physically, mentally, and you're thinking, well, this is all good. You're talking about biblical truth and a God that desires abundance and flourishing and assures victory. That's all well and good. But I pray that we all get a glimpse of God's victory, of God's heart, of God's desire, of God's plan for us individually and corporately. Just as Gideon did, that Gideon went down to the camp, got a glimpse of what God was going to do, and that emboldened him, encouraged him, reassured him. I pray that for all of us, that in whatever shape and form it may come, that we get a glimpse in the coming days and weeks of what God has in store and what God assures and reassures us for the coming time, that he will be bringing victory in relationships, in prospects, in church ministry and in gifting. And it is in weakness that God works powerfully. Gideon, when the angel of the Lord came to Gideon, Gideon said to him, and again it's in Judges 6, he said, look, my clan is the weakest clan in Israel. And in that clan, my family in that is the weakest. And I'm the least and the weakest in that family. Are you sure you've got the right guy? But we read in Judges 6, verse 12, that when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. That was the identity that God spoke over Gideon. And when we talk about the victory, that is going to come, of what God's plan that he has for certain individuals, for the world, that of course is going to happen. And God, I'm sure, in some shape or form, wasn't going to let the Israelites be oppressed. There was going to be victory at some point over the Midianites. But Gideon put up his hand and decided that he was going to participate in that and help lead that and bring that about. And that started right there in Judges 6, where Gideon accepts the identity that God spoke over him. Gideon said, I'm the least of my family, who is the least of the clans of Israel. You've got the wrong guy. God said, no, you are a mighty warrior. And that was the identity that Gideon walked in its authority and its power, and was able to participate in the victory that God then worked through against the Midianites. However you may be feeling, for whatever reason, about your weakness, you can't see victory in particular situations or your role to play in that, walk in the identity that God has spoken over you. Perhaps in the numerous biblical promises that you know, or the prophetic that people have spoken over you, or what you have uncovered in your diligent praying into God. Walk in the identity that God has spoken over you, so you can participate in victory that God has assured. We read in the letter to the Corinthians, in 2 Corinthians, Paul is talking about the thorn of his flesh that God had given him. And we read in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 verse 7, to keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that the Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. I pray that for all of us, we take that to encourage and to embolden us in this time. God's grace. He says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. Gideon was very upfront and honest about his faults and his weaknesses. But God's power, God's victory was made perfect in and through him. And it started with him putting his hand up and walking in the identity that God gave him. Go, the Lord is with you, you mighty warrior. Let us go now into this year, walking in the authority and the identity that has been spoken and promised over us by our Father God. Knowing full well in the knowledge that it is not by our own strength, it is not anything that we can boast in of our own strength or mental fortitude, but it is in the strength and power of God that is made perfect through our weakness, that we can declare in these difficult times that we do not accept decline or deterioration or brokenness, or expect to see things just stagnating or treading water. But we can declare in not a false hope, but a strong hope in the one true God, that we will see in our lives individually and as a church. We will see abundance, we will see flourishing, and we will see victory, because God's grace is sufficient for us, and when we are weak, then he is strong. Amen.